I was very blessed in my career to be part of the personal computer revolution. I was on the team, very junior, very minor member of the team working on the world's first laptop.
Oh, wow.
It was a real blessing. I do not want to overstate my role there. But ultimately, I did play a major role in the development of a lot of PC technologies and the maturation of that industry. I'm very proud of that. And what was wonderful about that time period was I woke up every day knowing that what I worked on was changing the world, and it did. And now, I'm 60 now, almost 61. I was, well, hey, there is a finite amount of time left. What am I going to spend my time on? I can either go drink peach daiquiris on the beach, sounds nice, okay, or can attack this problem, which is a broken monetary system. And I believe that's the biggest problem in the world. I believe we can trace almost every problem in the world to a broken monetary system. And we have a one-time chance in the history of mankind to fix it. I don't believe this chance will ever come again. And Bitcoin is that fix.
Hello, and welcome back to Bitcoin for Professionals. Today we have a special guest, Bob Burnett. How you doing, Bob?
Hello, Ralph. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Bob, you've been all over the place. Everywhere I look, X, YouTube, you're there. I love what you're doing. I'm a huge fan. I can't wait to dig into this conversation. For that, thank you so much for participating in this episode.
Well, like I said, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And I think you have an audience that maybe I don't get a chance to interact with as much. So I look forward to this.
Great, great. So let's dive straight into it. You've had a long career in tech. Maybe you can give us a little bit about your background, kind of like a quick resume, if you will, just so that people know who they're hearing, who they're listening to. That would be great.
Sure. Well, as you've said, I've had a long career, which is a very kind way of saying I'm an old man.
Oh
But
no,
well,
you're,
it's the truth of the matter,
you're
right?
using my words against me. I'll be
But it's just the truth, right? So my entry into the technology world really goes all the way back to the late 70s. I won't bore everybody with the gory details of that, but in summary, I ended up spending really the first 25 years or so of my career in the personal computer industry. And those of you who are older might remember a company called Gateway. Gateway was in the 90s, especially the late 90s, early 2000s, one of the top 5 biggest personal computer companies in the world. We were about $10 billion in revenue, 25,000 employees, and I was the chief technical officer there, which meant I led the development of the products at that company. I also ran Gateway's international business too, so it was a really great experience. Got to wear 2 hats, one as a technologist and one as a business person, and I think that's really helped me see the world, look at business opportunities going forward in a different way. I got into this space in 2017, and this space being the world of Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and mining. And I got through it in an unusual way, in that somebody had, an old acquaintance from my Gateway days had called me up and said, Bob, can you design and manufacture some Ethereum mining equipment for me? And so I was thinking about this from the perspective of somebody from the computer world, not from the cryptocurrency world. So to me, it was a customer. And they wanted to buy several hundred of these units that were about $6,000 each. So it was an interesting opportunity, several $million of revenue. So I did that for them. And through that, it really entered this space. And after fulfilling that order, I went to other people and said, hey, design this computer. Would you like to buy some? And people started saying yes. But almost all of them said yes, but only if I would run the computer for them, if I would provide the hosting service. So I wasn't thinking of that. But necessity is the mother of invention. And so I entered that business as well and said, well, I'll sell you the computer and then I'll host it for you. Me and my team started seeing that these machines were making a fair amount of money. And so we said, well, why don't we take our profits and do it to build our own and build and run our own equipment, which we did. All this that I just talked about was really in the space of 9 months to a year, at which point I started looking harder at Ethereum as first as a technologist, and then I have a background in economics as well. And I won't bore people with the story, but I'll just say that I found lots of warts in the Ethereum story that made me feel it was not going to be a long-term success. And I started searching elsewhere, and I found Bitcoin. And it started, like a lot of people, I started out saying, hey, can I find a technological flaw? And there were several times where I thought I found a flaw, but then it turned out I was wrong. And by the Adam Back, I remember I've talked to him and heard him talk many times about the same sort of thing. Like some of us with more technological backgrounds, we want to find the flaw, right? Like that's kind of almost like the fun thing, and try to find it, only to find out, nope, it was a dead end. It was a dead end. It was a dead end. And so I kind of ran out of technical flaws. And then I started looking at it from a monetary perspective and saw the brilliance of everything from the supply issuance, the absolute scarcity, like those sort of aspects of it. And now I would say probably since the middle of 2018 to the end of 2018, somewhere in that time frame, I've dedicated myself to Bitcoin.
That's amazing. Thank you for that background. A few things I'd like to touch on though. So one, I'm surprised that, your first mining rigs or mining equipment came from Ethereum customers and not Bitcoin customers. Like it seems so long ago before they transitioned to proof of stake, right? I mean, that's
Yes.
quite a dramatic change. Must look, but on that point, so I love the fact that, you know, a lot of people go down the Ethereum rabbit hole, similar to you as technologists, because that's how it's pushed out, right? Like it's,
Yes.
programmable money and you can
Yep.
build a lot of stuff on top of it. But I guess your economics background also helps. So you took a contrarian approach where a lot of Bitcoiners do. And I think it's a common thing. We like to try to break something until, we realize you can't break it. And I guess that's how you found your way to Bitcoin. But you said you were trained as an economist as well. So I'm assuming that was Keynes economics, not Austrian. Did you find it difficult to reconcile Bitcoin with, what you were taught, or did you have to go down the Austrian rabbit hole?
Well, so interestingly so I did do studies in economics, and it was all Keynesian, as you said. However, as I mentioned, I'm an old man. So those studies occurred in the 70s and 80s. And then what happened was in 2001, there was the famous dot-com bubble.
Mm.
Okay. And I had acquired a fair amount of wealth through the 90s because I was part of the team that took Gateway public, and I had done pretty well. And let's just say when the dot-com bubble happened, I lost a lot of wealth. And I became disillusioned by Wall Street. I knew something was wrong.
Mm.
I'll also say, I don't want to dwell on it, that having been part of a public company and in the C-suite of a public company, I worked a lot with the Wall Street firms that were covering our stock, or the funds that were investing in our stock or considering investing in our stock. And largely became unimpressed by the people I was dealing with. I had held them in very high esteem prior to that. There was kind of almost this thing like, these must be really intelligent people. They must be very accomplished people.
Yeah.
And turns out they really aren't. Now, there's a couple bright ones, but on
Yeah.
the whole, they were very unimpressive people. And so I started searching. And then in that early 2000 period, I started finding the Austrian thought. So in kind of my quest to find something different, I had stumbled across the Austrian school of thought. And so luckily, that prepared me to maybe get Bitcoin quicker, as a result. And, sometimes I'll say, technology and Austrian economics and had a baby, and the baby was Bitcoin. Really, I think you could kind of look at it that way. It was kind of that confluence, and it just so happens. I mean, I'm not an expert on everything in the world, but it happens to be there's two areas where I have some reasonable expertise, and those happen to be those. So it put me in a really good position to.
That's amazing. Yeah, being a technologist and an economist, I mean, it's a rare pairing, right? One of them is a more scientific field, the other one is more, especially Keynes economics. It's trying to be scientific, but it really isn't. You're preaching to the choir. I
Yeah,
spent my entire career in TradFi. I
yeah,
worked in institutional asset management, and when I got into Bitcoin, kind of the veil was lifted because I thought, these
yeah.
multi-billion-dollar portfolio managers were like so bright, so smart. And then I would look at their portfolio and compare it to my, small portfolio of just holding Bitcoin. I was outperforming them at every single level, and they
I
had
bet
like
you are. Yeah,
two PhDs, CFA, and years of study, many models and all that. They'd make you feel like you're inferior, like you can't keep up.
yeah,
But then I'm like, yeah, but why are clients paying them money? And I'm not a portfolio manager. I'm an institutional sales guy, and I'm out competing every single one of them. But I
yeah,
love to hear that story. Austrian was a was quite the eye-opening for me, to be honest, because university, master's degree, working in finance, they keep throwing these formulas, these
yeah,
indicators, GDP, and then you realize like all of this is kind of built to push a certain narrative. But
yeah.
curious, do you have a specific Bitcoin aha moment? Like, was there something, especially from your point of view as a technologist and economist, that really stuck with you? I'm curious to hear what it is.
Uh, it was a little more gradual for me
Mm,
because, like I said, it was more a series of trying to disprove it
mm,
and then realizing that I can't disprove it, as opposed to a day when I suddenly could prove it. So um, it, I think interestingly, I think the impetus for me to look deeper at Bitcoin, I mean, we will start with that, is I saw two flaws that were glaring to me about Ethereum.
mm,
And the first one was the movement from proof of work to proof of stake, because I kind of got proof of work pretty quickly. That made sense to me pretty quickly, and said, well, why are you trying to change this? And it was very clear to me that the driving force was people within the Ethereum community falling for all the FUD about climate change, and that and that what we were doing was somehow fundamentally going to harm the world. So that was one.
mm,
And the second was that I've been involved in a lot of big projects over my life. Um, and what I found is that complexity is a real devil. And that what I saw was saw Ethereum just trying to be so many different things, trying to solve so many different problems, so many moving parts. And my experience is it never works. That, having a single focus, like you're trying to accomplish a single thing and do one thing, is much, much better. You don't, like, I came from the world, I spent a lot of my career designing laptops. Okay. There were points in time in where a lot of people were visualizing that laptops would have printers integrated in them and scanners integrated in them and like these sorts of things, and it never worked. Just that's a simple example, but you add too much complexity to what you're trying to do, you end up being shitty at everything instead of good at something. And then when you start going over to the Bitcoin world, get back to your fundamental question, Bitcoin is attempting to solve one problem, which is money, which is, and then you go back to the other stuff we were talking about on the economic side. Well, this is a pretty important problem to solve.
And
And
also, when it comes to money, you don't want it to be doing other things because then it loses its value as money, right? Money has to be
yes,
as simple, with the least amount of industrial use or whatever type of use, or else it's going to be consumed for other areas.
yeah, and I completely agree with that. But before we leave it, I want to say one other thing, because I think it's important. This whole thing about Austrian versus Keynesian, I
Mhm.
think, is worthy of a few seconds. And
Yeah.
I I think that one simple way to look at it, especially for those who haven't kind of spent time in that world, is that in the Keynesian world, there's this belief that we can mathematically predict and control economies, especially at the macro level. That,
Mhm.
we, given enough information and enough computing power, we can make the economy do what we want to do. And the Austrian thought is the opposite of that to a certain degree. I'm not saying there's not math and science involved in it, but it's more, hey, economies are living, breathing things that are very complex. And when we try to manipulate them, they will revolt against us. that 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 so if you look at it, governments which control money really like Keynesian thought, because it says, hey, we're going to be in control and we're going to make this thing work the way that we want. Which, by the way, is a very Karl Marx sort of thing too,
Yes.
right? So, um, I'm not saying everybody that's in the Keynesian world is a communist, but it's a very communist way of thinking, at least that aspect. And I think the Austrians are very free market. Let the market do what it does. If we're going to have a recession, well, we're going to have a recession. So let it run its course. It'll be over quickly. And so it removes the bubbles and the bus. So Bitcoin, by embracing something that's somewhat founded in Austrian thought, is an attempt to bring the world to this much more stable, unmanipulated form of money. So I'm so anyway, that really resonated with me.
And also, I like how you put it because the more you poke and force something to happen, the more misallocation of capital is created
Yes.
because you don't have perfect information. You're just guessing really what it is. Like you can't generalize human behavior. And that's my problem with
Right.
Keynes, because they're trying to generalize human behavior. You can't even generalize what's going to happen in 5 hours of your time. So it's really hard to get perfect information. And when you try to force an action on a group that is functioning, like you said, like a living organism, it's going to create inefficiencies. The money's going to go
Right.
places where it shouldn't go, and
Yeah.
capital will be destroyed. And we see that a lot, I think, nowadays in the venture capital space, especially in the crypto
Oh,
industry, because it's really not based on adding value. It's really just marketing hype. And then when the money runs out, that capital is destroyed. So,
yeah.
yeah, I love that you brought up that point. I want to get into the meat of our conversation
Okay.
because
Yeah.
it's not easy. One of the hardest things to explain to new people that are trying to learn Bitcoin, they can understand 21 million supply, they can understand to some degree the consensus, but what they don't understand is mining. Maybe you can give us, based on your experience, you've been in the space for a while, you worked on Ethereum, Bitcoin, and you're doing your own thing now. How would you explain to a new person that's looking to learn about Bitcoin one of its most crucial components in the simplest way possible?
Yeah, you're right. By the way, it is one of the trickier things to grasp.
Oh, trust me,
And
I struggled with it. I'm not a technologist. The first time I started to try to crack Bitcoin mining, I'm like, it's a lot.
yeah, well, I think to start, we actually start outside of Bitcoin in the fiat system. So, um, and it comes back to what problem are we trying to solve? What problems are we trying to solve? Well, in the fiat system, if let's say, Ralph, we for whatever reason I needed to send you $100 right now, we could probably figure out a way through PayPal, Venmo, Zelle. I could wire you money. There's a Western Union. There's all kinds of different methods upon which I could get you $100 right now. The common element of all those methods, though, or one of the common elements of all that, is that a third party must approve the transaction,
Hmm.
right? And by the way, given that you and I live in different countries, the likelihood that we hit sticking points in that process increases dramatically, because cross border stuff tends in the fiat system tends to get a lot stickier. So, in other words, all fiat, with the exception of cash, is a permissioned system. Okay. So Bitcoin was created as an unpermissioned system. So
Can you
Satoshi's
can
genius.
you explain that? What do you mean by unpermissioned? Meaning, uh, you can just use it without someone approving your transaction, correct?
Yeah. Now the reason that we use permissioned systems is that it's difficult. Like in the fiat world, if I'm sending you the $100, and let's say you are going to send me a shirt when you receive the $100, is you need to know, one, that you really have the $100 and that it's not going to be taken away from you, right? I mean, that's the fundamental thing. You don't want to complete this transaction until that happens. Well, you have a faith for the most part, by the way, that if you see your PayPal balance increase by $100 or your bank account through a bank wire goes up by 100, that it's really there.
Hmm.
That's largely true, although not exactly true.
Yes.
And there's something called transaction finality that doesn't actually occur in that permissioned fiat system for quite a while, but it's largely true. Okay. When Satoshi created Bitcoin, one of the problems he wanted to solve, it's very early in the white paper in the abstract, is a peer-to-peer form of digital cash, right? That would allow two people to transact without without a third party or intermediary. Okay. So the idea behind Bitcoin is Bob can send we'll call it $100, but $100 of Bitcoin to Ralph. And Ralph can not only look at his wallet, but he can go look at his node. He can look on the blockchain through other places and see that transaction there. And so we have to have a process that allows that. So, for Satoshi to fulfill that vision of peer-to-peer digital cash transacting between two people, there has to be a way for that to happen such that you, as the receiver of the money, can know with certainty that it's really there and it's not coming back. And it also gives me proof as the sender that I did it, right? So we how can we do that? So mining is the process by which that validation occurs. Now, to make this happen, and this is where I'm going to tread carefully. I may take for those that are more technical, I may take a few liberties to communicate concept as opposed to 100% being technically accurate. The basic idea is that at any point in time, there are a whole series of transactions that you could consider pending in Bitcoin. So when I from my wallet send you, Ralph, we'll call it, for this, we'll say 1/10 of a Bitcoin. I'm sending you 1/10 of a Bitcoin. What will happen is every node within the Bitcoin infrastructure will see that I have initiated this transaction and I've signed it. So much like I've signed a check. I've digitally signed it. However, at that point, the transaction is not in a block, okay, which means it's not confirmed. What will happen via the mining process is that as soon as the current block the network is working on confirms, we'll come back to what that means, what will happen is all the miners in the world will go look into this pending transaction pool. It might have 20,000, it might have 100,000, it might have 1,000,000 different transactions waiting to be processed, waiting for confirmation. Each miner, though, can only pick about 4,000. So that's one of the interesting things is blocks have a limit of how big they can be. We can't just go take them all and process them. We have to make a choice. And there are great reasons, by the way, why that happens, but just bear with me that that's the way it is. So what happens is the miners then, each miner can pick whichever ones they want, by the way, too. So they're not all working on the same one. They can each pick them. And now each miner picks those and starts running an algorithm trying to hash those transactions. And the race is a very interesting race. So each miner is competing against all the other miners. There are about 7 million servers in the world today, by the way, something on that order. And they're all racing. Some of them are working on the same block because maybe like they're owned by the same company like mine, but others are working on different blocks. So anyway, we're racing. And what we're trying to do is we're throwing a tremendous amount of computing power and electricity at trying to find a hash, which is a mathematical function where you take all the data, you run it through an algorithm, and a single number comes out. In this case, it's a single 256-bit number. That's, by the way, a massive number. You can represent more than all the atoms in the universe with that number. And what we're trying to do is create a hash of the block that equals a number lower than a certain amount. And that low number is like right now it may sound low, but that low number is currently equivalent to, in difficulty to find, is equivalent to flipping a coin and getting heads 78 times in a row.
Yeah.
Okay. It's doable, right?
But
Okay.
extremely difficult.
Yeah, but it's extremely difficult. Now, the reason I walked through this, and I apologize for the depth of it, is that this is proof of work. There's no way to find that number without putting in a tremendous amount of work. And so the miner that finds that, just kind of a random event across the entire network, then publishes to the rest of the network, I found it. You can now validate it. You can validate it in a microsecond. To find it can take an eternity, but to validate it takes a microsecond. So the rest of the network can see, yep, let's say it was my machine that found it. Bob's machine found it. All the transactions in his block are now validated. They're now put onto the blockchain. And now you, Ralph, at that point can know with confidence that the money is really yours. Okay,
And
so
Bob, just before you keep going, so just quickly, the algorithm for our audience, every miner, are they using the same exact algorithm?
yeah, basically, yes.
Okay. And what they're doing, this race is really, if we want to really simplify, a guessing game. So they're changing one variable in that whole block. So the transaction, and they're just guessing as fast as humanly possible. There's no
Yes.
like you can be better than someone else in terms of you have better guesses. It's just you just have more guesses than everyone
You have
else.
more guesses, yeah. So it's like
Okay.
buying lottery tickets. So
Okay.
if your machine is more powerful or you have more machines, you get more guesses, you get more lottery tickets. But
Yeah.
and by the number of guesses is a mind-numbing number.
Yes.
So like one average machine on the network today is guessing 150 trillion times per second.
Wow.
And there are 7 million of those machines guessing that many times. Like, so it's not a number. Even me as a math guy doing this, I really can't put my head around this because, like I said, we're talking about numbers like, atoms in the universe. Like you really can't
Yeah, the
grasp.
human mind is not equipped to wrap its head around such large numbers.
Yeah,
It's not a part of our reality, basically. But
right.
that's amazing. That's actually really helpful, and I think this will be helpful. I'll make sure to share this with some of the people I'm struggling to explain Bitcoin mining with because you took it
Yeah.
really one step at a time. But yeah, please go ahead.
So, well, yeah. So mining now. So that's the what is the miner doing? He's replacing PayPal
Mm,
or so that's probably I could have said that at first, but basically that's the reason I took you through that is this function is replacing those third-party intermediaries, but it's a decentralized network controlled by nobody. Just we say it's a set of rules with no rulers, right?
mm,
So it means that like I said, you and I are living in different countries. My wife, by the way, is from the Philippines, and so her family is there. When we use the fiat system to send money to the Philippines, we often run into problems, and it's very frustrating. There are cases where, even in our own family, where we're trying to get money to somebody for medical care reasons, and it wasn't getting through, and it was, potentially life-threatening, right? So very, very frustrating. So Bitcoin kind of breaks that whole mold, and it gives ultimately it ends up with you, Ralph, knowing that you received the money, and now it's yours forever, properly cared for, and indisputable. So now the miners don't do this for nothing, though.
Of course not.
And so they 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 get paid in two ways. The first way is through what's called the block subsidy. So as you said, most people know now there's 21 million Bitcoin eventually that will be in the network. And many have often heard that the last Bitcoin gets released around 120 years from now, roughly 2140. It gets released through this process, though. So right now, the miner that wins gets 3 1/8 Bitcoin for their efforts as part of the subsidy. So that is essentially part of the 21 million being issued. It's new Bitcoin. It's like new dollar bills coming off the printing press. Sometimes we call that virgin Bitcoin.
And that's the part that of Bitcoin that's inflationary, but it is inflationary at a decreasing rate over time. And
Correct.
okay, good.
Correct. Yeah. So right now, there's 3 1/8 Bitcoin that comes out with every block. There's a little over 50,000 blocks a year. So just in general terms, there's about 160,000 Bitcoin per year coming out through this process. That will happen for another 3 years. And when you hear the word halving, that's what will happen in 3 years. That rate will get cut in half. It will drop to about 80,000 a year. 4 years after that, roughly, it will drop to 40,000. So, and that's why I'm going off the top of my head, but it's something like the last several decades are really just one Bitcoin being, chasing the last Bitcoin. Like,
Yeah.
so
That's fascinating. People, they say, Bitcoin mining is critical to Bitcoin's security. The more compute the network is using, the more secure the network is. How does that equate? How does Bitcoin mining equate security?
all right. So as I mentioned, there's a race, right? These 7 million servers are racing against each other to mine a block. There's still today a relatively diverse group of people. Well, this is a danger point for Bitcoin.
We're going to talk about that in a second.
Yeah. We're still at a point where there's, I would say, just enough diversity that somebody trying to attack the network, something called a 51% attack, but more importantly, there's concerns about censorship, about blacklists occurring. In other words, let's say the world had discovered what your wallet address was, Ralph, and so when I was trying to send that tenth of a Bitcoin to you, every miner in the world just ignored it. And you didn't even have one of the 7 million servers that would ever pick you. It would just sit there forever in this pending state, right? I mean, that would be a form of censorship. So when you hear people in Bitcoin talk about censorship, that's kind of what they mean is if we ignore transactions of certain individuals or organizations, then we think that that's bad. Most Bitcoiners think that that's bad. By the way, it's very opposite of the fiat system, where money is commonly used as a weapon or means of control.
Yes.
So if a bank account is associated with North Korea, well,
it's over. Yes.
it's a non-starter for most, at least Western organizations, right? They're not gonna interface with that, and if they did, they might even go to jail. And kind of one of the premises of Bitcoin is money should not be a means of control. It should not be a weapon. It should not be used to control people. So anyway, we run the risk, though, that if too much of the network is in the hands of too few,
Mm.
that could start happening.
Okay.
So that's the real danger. Now, the bigger the network is, the harder it is for one or two parties to take control of it. And so if you read like the early works of Satoshi or some of the very early Bitcoiners, I mean, they were aware of this to a certain degree, but they didn't really envision the institutionalization of mining. They viewed it more as something that every Bitcoiner did. I'm sure they knew, and there were a few references that companies would emerge, but they really thought there would be millions and millions of individuals who would still be mining.
Yeah, but now it's not affordable for most individuals. It just makes no sense to mine at home, especially with electricity costs. The equipment isn't specialized enough. I know there was a phase where you could use your graphic card to try to
Yeah.
mine Bitcoin, but those days are long gone.
Yes and no. So I would say this. You are correct that at residential rates around the world, it's very difficult to look at mining as something that can be done profitably.
Mm.
Like it probably can be done only at a loss. However, I would challenge at least a lot of people to say, if you have a material investment in Bitcoin, one of the greatest ways for you to protect that is to be part of the network. And so I'll just make a number up, but if you have 5 Bitcoin, for you to each year lose the equivalent of $300 or $400 in electricity to participate in the network doesn't seem like a bad investment. Because one of the things I'll say, I've been saying more recently, is while I definitely agree with the spirit of hodling from the perspective of, yes, I want people to go buy Bitcoin and hold it, and preserve as much wealth as possible in Bitcoin. I think some people have taken that phrase in a non-participatory manner,
Mm.
meaning, well, all I have to do is buy Bitcoin and sit back, and everybody else is going to do the work. Like it's if
I
you're a
love that.
citizen of a country, I think part of being a good citizen is voting, of serving on juries, on running for office if you can. I'm not saying everybody has to do all these things, but like you have to participate as a citizen for the country to be healthy. Because if everybody says, I won't vote, I won't serve in the military, I won't serve on a jury duty, you no longer have a country.
Yeah.
Well, Bitcoin has some of those same attributes. I think if you start acquiring material amount of wealth in Bitcoin, I think of yourself as a citizen of Bitcoin.
Mm.
And you should do something to improve the ecosystem. Now, that could be running a node. It could be doing a podcast and educating people. It could be running a mining company. There's a lot of different things you could do. But I think participatory behavior is important for the sustenance of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I love that. And like you said, I mean, think of it as a subscription fee that you pay to, take advantage of this permissionless, censorship resistant, uh, purchasing power protecting asset. So
Correct.
definitely, I love how you put that. And I mean, yeah, it's not as daunting as it used to be to set up a node and to set up a mining rig, etc.
Yeah.
We've come a long way compared
Yeah,
to 10 years ago, where you really needed to be a technologist. And that
that's
that's
true.
great. Yeah. And
Yeah.
you've termed the coin, Bob, which I find interesting, and I'd love you to elaborate on uh, the term horse class mining sites. What does that mean?
Yeah. If we go back to those formative years when I was trying to figure my path, one of the things that I saw emerging was that there were three distinct groups that were entering mining. One group I call the elephants, and you'd probably largely think of them as the public companies. They're big and powerful. By the way, about 35% of the network is the hashing that occurs through the elephants. A Riot, Clean Spark, Marathon, those kind of companies. They're big and powerful. The sites they build are massive, 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts, 500 megawatts. They take forever to build those sites. The sites, like elephants, don't move well.
Yes.
And I also commonly say they are easy to hunt, meaning in a period of time in which the world is adversarial to Bitcoin, they will be very easy to identify the companies and the sites. And if you want to tax them, shut them down, charge them for carbon tax credits, whatever, they will be easy to find. Okay. The other side are the rabbits. We were talking about the rabbits. By the way, I would encourage people that have any inclination toward it to look at buying a BitAxe, which is about $180 to $200 device, and it's very quiet. I have one running 3 meters away from me. You probably can't hear it, so it's very quiet.
And you never know. You might be lucky.
I might get lucky, right? So, but rabbits are the plebs, the individuals out there mining. They have one in a garage. They have one in a server closet. They have a little BitAxe like I have. Independently, each of them is essentially meaningless, but collectively they can have a lot of power. Much like one rabbit running around in your garden isn't a big problem, but if you get an infestation of rabbits,
Yes,
they'll eat all of your flowers and your vegetables, right? So, but the thing about rabbits is they can multiply quickly. They're hard to find. If you start shooting rabbits, you start hunting rabbits and shooting them, they'll scatter. Like you'll never catch them all. So they're very powerful. So, like right now, I think one of the things with Bitcoiners is we're feeling very comfortable and complacent, and time permitting, maybe Will, you can come back to this point. So, but those rabbits are really, really important in times when, if we put on a hat and we think in a very dystopian way, if all the governments of the world want to ban Bitcoin, they want to shut us down, how's it going to keep going? The elephants are going to get massacred. We need the rabbits. They need to be there as that last line of defense, right? They're the guerrilla fighters that will, they'll have to literally go building to building to get them all, right? Well, the horse class miners, which is what my company focuses on, sits in a space between those two. So they're small to medium size commercial sites. And I use the term horses because a horse is highly mobile. Maybe can't run and hide the same as a rabbit, but we build sites, for instance, like 1 megawatt, 2 megawatts, half a megawatt. Almost everything that we build with is mobile. They're containers. Most of what we're building now is what I call wild horses, which is the second piece of this. So a wild horse meaning that we produce our own energy.
Oh, wow.
So we are no longer grid connected in a lot of what I do. And I do that on purpose. One is I can produce energy typically cheaper than I can buy it from the grid. It costs me more capital up front, but my operating costs are lower. And secondly, I like permissionless things. I don't need the permission of the electric company or a state or local government to get my energy. I do it myself. So the horse class is small to medium sized commercial miners. They are relatively mobile. If you start shooting horses, we will scatter too.
Yeah.
And we already kind of mine in often indescript, difficult to know ways. Like one of the stories I tell, this is an on-grid situation, but I have a facility of 2 megawatts in South Dakota, and it's on the backside of a burrito factory. So there's a commercial food company making burritos, and on the backside are a couple containers. And other than me telling anybody that exists, there's no way anybody would even know that it's there.
That's amazing. It's a form of stealth type of setup, basically.
Correct.
Nice. That's so interesting. I love how you broke down using, animals by size and speed and all that. So you would encourage to fight this elephant trend that we're seeing. So I'm assuming the work you're doing and what you're preaching is you want more people involved in Bitcoin mining. And I think what I'm getting from you is that you do have concerns about the centralization of Bitcoin mining.
I have real concerns, yes. So there is a centralization of hash rate, and I'll be specific too. So I'm becoming very vigilant and somewhat of a stickler about vocabulary. And so one of those things is distinction between a company that hashes and a company that mines, or an individual. Okay. So a hashing is the function we talked about. Okay. It's running the hardware, performing this hashing algorithm. Okay. And most of the big name companies, like the ones I mentioned earlier, are hashing companies. They are not mining companies.
Okay.
Mining means that you have a node that is connected to the network, that you are looking into what's called the mempool, which is that place where all the pending transactions are. You are making choices about what transactions go into your block. You are directly receiving the payment from the network, like the subsidy that we talked about. And you are hashing. Now, what happens is most of the companies we call miners are only performing the hashing function, and what they've done is they're letting a completely different organization, the mining pools, perform all the other steps. But the essence of mining is actually in the other steps. That's the part that's connected to the network. It pulls the transactions off of the network. It receives the Coinbase transaction from the network. It's the only one. So what's happened is the big hashing companies, I use the word abdicate. They have abdicated that role to the mining pools. And what has resulted is we now have two pools. One's called Foundry, one's run by Antpool, and those two together have well over 50% of the world's hash rate directed at it. So there's not as much diversity in what's called the template creation, which in simple terms means, I gave you that example of you being blacklisted. What we want is thousands and tens of thousands of people making those, what's called the template selection, which is picking the transactions and then mining against it. So even if a large percentage of the network is trying to blacklist Ralph, that eventually Ralph will find his way
Someone will pick it up, basically.
Someone will pick it up.
Okay.
And there's a very complex thing, but you would have the option, if you're kind of stuck, to add more fees. You can think of it as tips or bribes to try to get somebody to take your transaction. Bitcoin has a lot of these mechanisms in place to protect itself against that stuff, but it's not immune. Bitcoin, I want to make sure people don't take this in the wrong way. I am a Bitcoin maximalist and I am a Bitcoin optimist. However, Bitcoin has vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities all almost come from within, though.
Mm.
That it's not a government banning us that's the risk. It's not something better becoming available. It's the Bitcoin community getting complacent and letting itself get lazy.
Mm.
If maintained properly, it's essentially perfect and it stays in balance. And so part of what I do, I like to come to talk to people like you, is I don't want people to fall into that complacency. And I think we're in an especially dangerous time right now because things are going so well. Like, that's the danger point, right? Is when everything's going well and you forget that things can go wrong. It's, I think, when you get sloppy.
Yeah, and I think, yes, the ETFs in 2024 were great from a marketing point of view and legitimizing Bitcoin and kind of reducing the risk of outright government ban. 2025 talks about Bitcoin strategic reserves, of course, is a huge positive for price. But like you said, I agree. If something were to hurt Bitcoin, it would be, which is ironic, people that
Yeah,
are lazy and complacent. It seems like we are the problem in almost every facet of technology, innovation. We are
right.
the weakest link at the end. And I love the fact that you call it out. And it's not about being, a dystopian. You can be an optimist and push for that. It's important to have these conversations to bring awareness because you don't
Yeah,
know, someone might be watching and like, yeah, I'm gonna give Bitcoin mining a shot, even if I have to pay a bit more electricity, if that's going to
yeah,
secure or help secure my exposure over a longer period of time, then that costs nothing. If Bitcoin keeps doing what it's doing, block after block for a very long period of time, I mean, that's worth the investment, right? So I love that.
exactly.
So I'm based in the GCC in the UAE. The GCC is known or synonymous to oil, energy. They've been
Yeah.
trying to diversify their economies away from that, but still, it's still a major component. Have you had any views on Bitcoin mining? Because we know there's a few major players that are in the region, talking to sovereign wealth funds, etc. From your point of view, is that region an ideal location given the abundance of oil? I mean, electricity isn't cheap. I mean, in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, etc., I mean, it comes at a cost. You would think it's much cheaper, but a lot of Bitcoin miners struggle here. And even though you go to Abu Dhabi, you see Bitcoin mining containers all over the place. But that's, I think, the government. But I'd love to get your thought. You would maybe have a view on that, and I'd love to get that.
Okay, so first, it should be a shining point within the network, um, because I think Bitcoin can solve a massive problem, which is, as oil is produced, gas is produced as well, and
Mm.
so the more oil that's being produced, the more gas that needs to either be flared or disposed of in some way. And there's no more efficient way to use that gas than to mine Bitcoin. And so I'm doing this some in the US already. I don't have a presence in your region of the world yet, although I actually desire it. But
You should come
uh,
visit. We'll take care of you here.
I am due for a visit. I would like to do that.
Yeah. So
Um,
keep me to that. I mean, you have my contact. I'll be happy to show you around and introduce you to people if need be.
well, wonderful, wonderful. But you have this resource there that is in essence free. It's a problem, not, and so you can take that problem and turn it into gigawatts
Mm.
of energy production. So it should be one of the shining stars. Now, I don't know enough about how um, mineral rights and gas rights and water rights and surface rights and all that apply within the region. Who owns what, and what regulatory and environmental standards are required. But I can say that Bitcoin mining, almost holistically, as long as you got somebody looking at it with the proper lens, will agree it solves almost every problem in the equation. It's better and an improvement over the current system. So, so number one, at some point somebody's going to figure it out, um, and I think it will become much more appealing and much more robust. I'll also say, and this is probably much more than we can go into on a deep dive, but my advice to every nation state of the world is to have some Bitcoin mining within the borders of your country. If you are a leader of a nation state, you should be a miner. And I would say the same thing to any major financial institution. You should be a miner. That your access to block space, not even the Bitcoin, your access to block space creates financial sovereignty. So we talked about this enough to a certain degree. If you're a country, this is an example, and you own 1/10 of 1% of the world's hash power, that means mathematically once a week you will win a block. And that block can contain about 4,000 transactions. You can pick whatever transactions you wish. And so even in a worst case, like the entire Western world bans you like North Korea is banned today from the global financial systems, you have 4,000 transactions that you can pick, and you can do business with anybody in the world. So I believe that ultimately the sovereignty of nations themselves will be dependent upon having some level of mining. And I think that's the bare minimum, by the way, 1/10 of 1%, one block a week.
That's yeah, and I think we're starting to see that over the last few years between sanctions, between tariffs as well. Nation states seem to be more nationalist, and they're now looking to position themselves to secure their future. And in the world we live in today, being able to transact is the lifeline of any nation, similar to any individual, right? So
Sure.
also, one thing we hear a lot about with regards to Bitcoin mining, and I want to get your take on it. A lot of people will throw at you, Bitcoin mining is so bad for the environment. It consumes energy, which could be used in other areas. What would you say to someone, even though the numbers show that over 50% of Bitcoin mining is done with sustainable energy? But I'd love to get your thoughts as an expert on that.
Yeah, it's one of the, if you forgive me for saying, one of the bigger pieces of bullshit that we face. Um, so we'll start with a couple statistics. First, how much energy does Bitcoin mining really use? Because it's often put in the context of it uses more energy than Austria, or they'll pick some nation, right? And that's supposed to scare people. Well, the reality is Bitcoin uses about 0.6% of the world's electricity. Okay. So my first response to that is to spend 0.6% of the world's energy on a fair, transparent, non-inflationary monetary system that, at least in my opinion, gives me more hope for the world that my grandkids are going to grow up in than anything else happening in the world is well worth it. So I'll start with that. The second is that, as you mentioned, Bitcoin seeks the lowest cost energy. The reason lower cost energy exists is because nobody else wants it. It's not cheap because everybody wants it. It's cheap because nobody else wants it.
Or it's somewhere where no one wants to go get it from.
Well, that's basically the same thing, right? So the beauty of Bitcoin is Bitcoin can go where the energy is produced. So, and it's also the only industry that can handle high degrees of variability. We call this curtailment or demand response or like these sort of things, meaning that in a world where a lot of energy being produced now is from inconsistent energy sources like solar and wind, we don't know when the wind's going to blow. We don't know when the sun's going to shine. And so if the sun is shining at a time when nobody wants to run their air conditioner, as an example, well, what do you do with the energy? You either turn it off or you divert it to Bitcoin miners, which suck it up and pay you something for it. So we're starting to monetize those assets. And one of the things you'll find with a lot of the green energy is there's something called the duck curve. And what it shows is kind of the mismatch between when energy is typically produced and when people want energy. They're often diametrically opposed. And unfortunately, energy is not easy to store. It's very expensive to store. So you either use it or don't produce it. But storing it really isn't a legitimate option. But Bitcoin changes all that because it can turn on and off. If you have, let's say, a traditional industry like aluminum smelting that consumes a lot of energy, once that factory is on and it's producing energy, it can't just turn off. And vice versa. If suddenly there's excess energy that they want to divert to it, it can't just turn on either. It's got really long ramp up and cool down periods. But Bitcoin mining is instantaneous. We can, in less than 1 second, fire up several megawatts, and we can do the opposite too if the energy suddenly goes away. So like if we look at this problem that occurred, today's April 29th, but if we look at this problem that occurred in Spain and Portugal over the last couple days, it appears to be one of these mismatches that caused the problem in the grid. And an appropriate amount of Bitcoin mining scattered throughout the grid would have created the stability for that thing to not have happened.
That's fascinating. Bob, you are one of the most generous people with your time. You're always out there educating people on podcasts, giving your thoughts, and here you are today doing the same with us. What drives you? What makes it all worthwhile? Because you give a lot of your time. I know you're very busy. It's not easy working in the mining industry. It's one of the most ruthless industries working to work in.
Yeah.
That's kind of, but and you're still out there sharing your knowledge. I'm just curious on a personal level before we wrap this up, like what drives you?
Well, at the start of this call, you asked me about some of my background, and I was very blessed in my career to be part of the personal computer revolution. I don't think I mentioned it, but I was on the team very junior, very minor member of the team working on the world's first laptop.
Oh, wow.
And it was a real blessing. I do not want to overstate my role there. But ultimately, I did play a major role in the development of a lot of PC technologies and the maturation of that industry. I'm very proud of that. And what was wonderful about that time period was I woke up every day knowing that what I worked on was changing the world, and it did. For younger people that weren't around before the personal computer, it was as revolutionary as the internet itself or the cell phone. I mean, it's a technology on par. In fact, I would say maybe even more significant. But I knew that what I was doing was changing the world. And now, as an older person with honestly a finite amount of time left, I'm 60 now, almost 61. I was, well, hey, there is a finite amount of time left. What am I going to spend my time on? I can either go drink peach daiquiris on the beach, sounds nice, okay, or can attack this problem, which is a broken monetary system. And I believe that's the biggest problem in the world. I believe we can trace almost every problem in the world to a broken monetary system. And we have a one-time chance in the history of mankind to fix it. I don't believe this chance will ever come again. And Bitcoin is that fix. So I think that it's imprudent on me, given my background, to drink a few less peach daiquiris and spend more time trying to fix this. Because I do have, I have grandkids now. I know, their kids, my grandkids will have kids that will be alive when the last Bitcoin has already been mined. We're that connected now, right?
Yeah.
In time. And if Bitcoin fails, I will get a little dystopian, because I think that Bitcoin failing creates a pretty ugly black future ultimately. I don't like it. I don't want my grandkids and their kids to grow up in it. So that's why I'm here, as hopefully playing my role to advance this thing.
I love that. And please keep doing what you're doing. And I mean, you look great. You seem to be in really good shape. So
Well, thank you. I'm
yeah, you got the
trying. But
you got the energy, you got the a sharp
yeah.
mind. So uh, from my end, I'm super grateful for what you're doing and for constantly sharing that knowledge. Before we wrap it up, Bob, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your company. Where can people find you? Where can people look into your company and learn more about you and what you're doing?
Well, thank you. So first, to find me personally, I'm pretty active on Twitter at boomer_BTC. I have a little show that it's very irregular. It's called Old Man Yells. That logo's in the background for those watching, which is just me ranting. So if you didn't get enough today, well, there's some more out there. You can get your fill there. Barefoot Mining, you can find about us at barefootmining.com. And what we're looking for, honestly, we're different than we are a real mining company in that we do everything I talked about before. We create block templates, we receive Coinbase transactions, we do it what I consider to be the right way. But we're constantly seeking energy providers, number one. And what we're trying to do is find, as you said, unutilized energy sources that other people are not exploiting today, and energizing them and turning them into Bitcoin. And then we're also always on the lookout for investors. So usually when we bring up a new site, we usually do it as a unique company. Each site usually is a unique company. And we're always seeking investors who would like to be part of a venture like that. So, and also I'm on the board at Ocean, which is a mining pool. So those of you interested in that are mining yourself, would love to have you check out Ocean and consider mining with us.
100%. We'll make sure to have all the details in the show description. Thank you so much, Bob. It was truly, truly a pleasure. I mean, I follow you on X, and it's been truly an honor to have you on the show to actually meet you face to face.
Oh, thank you, Ralph. My pleasure. Thank you.